The rain hammered the space station like 1,000 hammers, its rhythmic thrum muffling the hushed whispers of danger swirling through the dimly lit alleyways. In the heart of this forsaken station, where criminals from every corner of the galaxy sought refuge, two figures met in the shadow of an industrial tower. One was a towering Igorian, his spiked armor glinting under the weak overhead lights. The other, a wiry, cloaked creature, only his glowing red eyes visible, exuded an air of quiet menace. The Igorian's hands shook, his voice tight with fear. "You really believe it?" he asked, his deep voice laced with doubt. The cloaked figure nodded slowly, a grin pulling at the edges of his lips. "There's no way we can ignore it, Thrak. You know who's coming." Thrak's massive hand flexed around the hilt of his blaster, his eyes scanning the rain-drenched alley, as if expecting an ambush. His voice dropped to a low growl. No one, has ever come for us. Not after we wiped out the Krizai cartel. Not after we took down the entire Balgar sector. I'm telling you, this one's different, the cloaked figure insisted, his tone betraying a tinge of fear. This is him. The Executioner. Thrak stiffened, the name sending a chill down his spine. He had heard the whispers, of course. They always spread like wildfire in the underworld, tales of an unstoppable force lurking in the dark corners of space. A human. A soldier. An executioner. The one who hunted the worst of the galaxy's scum, leaving only ruin in his wake. You're saying a human, is coming for us? Thrak scoffed, but his skepticism faltered as a cold sweat broke out on his brow. They've got no army. No fleets. What can one human do against the likes of us? The cloaked figure's red eyes gleamed, and he leaned in closer. Don't underestimate him, Thrak. He doesn't need an army. He is the army. And when he arrives, everyone dies. A flash of lightning illuminated the dark sky, casting brief, flickering shadows across the rain-soaked streets. The air tasted of ozone, electric with anticipation. The Igorian's mind raced, torn between dismissing the rumors and the deep, gnawing feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, this time the legends were true. Where's he coming from? Thrak asked, his voice more cautious now. The cloaked figure stepped back, his expression hardening. He's already here. The Igorian's hand instinctively went to his blaster, fingers twitching as if to draw it. I don't see any ships in orbit. There's no sign of an invasion fleet. You're telling me he's here, and we didn't even know it? The figure nodded. His ship is cloaked. But I've seen the signs. There's a pattern to his strikes, always in the shadows. Always when no one expects him. He moves quickly, leaves nothing but death in his wake. No survivors. Not a single trace. Thrak looked down the alley, his sharp instincts tingling with unease. For the first time in years, his empire, built on blood and betrayal, felt fragile. He had fought wars, taken planets, and crushed his enemies underfoot. But this felt different. The Executioner didn't play by the rules. The Executioner didn't care about fleets or armies. The Executioner was a shadow, a force of nature. And the criminal kingpins who ruled these sectors, from the mightiest to the smallest, were all its prey. Tell me this isn't true, Thrak growled, taking a step back. The cloaked figure met his gaze, his expression grave. I can't. The Executioner is here. And if we don't act fast, we're next. The Igorian's eyes narrowed. For a moment, he considered running. But there was nowhere to hide, not from a force like this. His hand tightened around his weapon. If the Executioner wanted war, then war it would be. He would burn the galaxy down if it came to it. With a deep, exhaled breath, Thrak turned and stormed toward his private transport, the clanking of his boots echoing in the alley. He had enemies to face. But even he knew, deep down, that no amount of firepower could stop what was coming. As the cloaked figure faded into the shadows, he allowed himself one final thought. Thrak was right about one thing. The Executioner had no army. He didn't need one. He was an army. And soon, the galaxy would know what it meant to truly fear the human who had come to claim it. The screams echoed through the darkened battlefield, swallowed by the unforgiving cold of the planet's atmosphere. Bodies littered the ground, alien, human, and everything in between. A single figure moved through the carnage, untouched by the chaos around him. His armor was stained with blood, but his steps were deliberate, calculated. The human executioner. In the distance, the remnants of a command post burned. A surviving officer, shaking with terror, reached for his weapon, but before he could pull the trigger, a single shot rang out. His body crumpled to the ground, a perfect mark. The executioner never missed. In every corner of the galaxy, from the deepest slums of abandoned moons to the majestic capitals of empire worlds, there were whispers about the human who moved like a shadow, eliminating the most dangerous criminals with deadly precision. There were rumors of his appearance, tall, clad in black, his face hidden behind a visor that glowed with a cold, unblinking light. And always, his weapon, a sleek, devastating rifle capable of tearing through the toughest of armor. They called him the Executioner. To the crime syndicates that ruled the galaxy's underbelly, the name was a death sentence. For years, he had been a silent force in the dark, taking down one high-profile target after another. No one knew who hired him, but those who did had a single thing in common: they were either dead or so deeply buried under the weight of their sins that they couldn't call for help. The executioner did not work for the law. He didn't take bounties. He had no allegiance except to himself and his mission. His reputation spread like wildfire, and soon, every major criminal syndicate in the galaxy had at least one story about the human who hunted them. Some said he had been a part of an elite human special forces unit, disavowed and forgotten by his government. Others said he was a rogue, a man on a personal vendetta against the very concept of crime itself. No one knew for sure. What was known, however, was that he was relentless. When he arrived, criminals died, quickly, efficiently, and without mercy. No one was safe. Not the smugglers. Not the drug lords. Not even the political figures who turned a blind eye to the violence that fueled their empires. The executioner had a singular goal: to erase the cancer of corruption from the galaxy, one criminal at a time. For years, the largest crime families had laughed at the idea of a single human being capable of threatening them. They had armies of mercenaries, fleets of ships, and the resources of entire star systems at their disposal. They believed they were untouchable. That was, until the day the executioner arrived. It had started with small, isolated incidents, disappearances, silent assassinations, and the sudden fall of a few minor players. But then, it escalated. Whole factions began to crumble overnight, their leaders found executed in their lavish estates, their security forces obliterated. Each time, there were no witnesses, no survivors, only whispers and the unshakable sense that the executioner was closing in. The crime lords tried to retaliate. They deployed their best mercenaries, hired the deadliest bounty hunters, and even engaged in covert operations to track him down. But every attempt to stop him failed. Those who tried never returned. The few who had seen the executioner and lived were left with only one message: no one survives him. But it wasn't just his skill with weapons that made him feared. It was his mind. The executioner understood his enemies better than they understood themselves. He knew where they would hide, how they would react, and what their weakest point was. He was always one step ahead. For the criminals who had learned to rule entire sectors with fear, the thought of a human, a single human, undermining everything they had built was unbearable. They had fought against armies, dealt with insurgencies, but this was different. This was the executioner. And he was coming for them all. The executioner wasn't just a name, it was a prophecy. And in every corner of the galaxy, criminals trembled, knowing that their time was coming. The galaxy's most feared had finally met their match. And there would be no escape. The doors to the crime lord's lair slammed open, and the guards barely had time to react before the first shot rang out. A blur of motion, swift, precise, deadly. The executioner didn't waste a second. Each movement was calculated, every strike a means to an end. The guards fell one by one, their screams silenced by the hum of his rifle. In the control room above, the crime lord, Zorath, watched the carnage unfold on the surveillance screens. His eyes narrowed, his fingers clenched around the arms of his chair. The executioner was here, and the station was already starting to burn under his wrath. "You really thought you could keep him out?" one of his trusted lieutenants sneered. "You think this human can take us down?" Zorath's lips twisted into a grimace. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. He doesn't just kill. He dismantles everything you've built, piece by piece. No one can stop him once he starts." Zorath had dealt with plenty of threats in his time, even entire armies. But the executioner? He was a different breed. A force of nature, methodical and relentless. No tricks, no politics, just destruction. And Zorath had learned that once the executioner's sights were set on you, it was already over. On the ground below, the executioner paused at the entrance to the inner sanctum, his rifle aimed at the door. The moment it opened, he entered without hesitation. He knew what waited inside, a room filled with the criminal elite, the ones who pulled the strings across the galaxy's most notorious syndicates. But they weren't ready for him. The executioner's boots barely made a sound as he stepped over the bodies of the fallen guards. He didn't speak. There was no need. His presence alone was enough to send a ripple of fear through the remaining mercenaries who now turned their weapons toward him. He didn't flinch. They opened fire. The first barrage of shots ricocheted off his reinforced armor, but he didn't move. In the blink of an eye, he was among them, the rifle snapping to life, each shot an execution. The mercenaries dropped like flies, their weapons no match for his speed or precision. His combat style was a brutal dance, a seamless blend of tactics and raw power. They never stood a chance. Zorath's voice crackled through the comm system. "Activate the station's defenses," he ordered. "We'll burn him out." A distant hum filled the air as the automated turrets on the station's outer rim came online. A barrage of heavy fire rocketed through the corridors, but the executioner was already gone, vanishing into the shadows. As the station's security systems locked down, the crime lord's men scrambled to protect their last line of defense. But they were too slow. The executioner was already in position, using the chaos of the station's malfunctioning lights to his advantage. From the shadows, his next shot found its mark, and Zorath's lieutenant crumpled to the ground. A single bullet, through the heart. The crime lord's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with rage. There was no stopping him. No surviving him. Zorath's voice cracked with panic as he ordered a full retreat. "He's here for us. He'll kill us all if we don't get out now." But it was too late. The executioner moved with surgical precision, taking out the remaining enemies one by one. He didn't need to hunt them down, he let them come to him. And each time they did, it was their last mistake. With the final enemy dead, the executioner stood in the center of the room, his rifle lowered. He didn't take pleasure in the kill, but it was necessary. For him, this was more than a mission, it was the destruction of an entire system of corruption. The galaxy would be better for it. As the lights flickered back on, revealing the full scope of the carnage, the control room doors slammed open. Zorath, sweat pouring down his face, staggered inside. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "You don't have to do this. I can make things right." The executioner didn't say a word. He raised his weapon, and Zorath's fate was sealed in a flash of light. The station fell silent once more, the last of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals erased from existence. For the executioner, it was just another job. Another chapter in his relentless crusade to rid the galaxy of the scourge that had festered too long. And he would not stop until it was all gone. As the lights dimmed and the station systems began to fail, the executioner disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving behind only the echo of his name. The blast doors slammed shut with a deafening roar, sealing the last of the executioner's enemies inside. The station trembled under the strain of the final assault, but the executioner was already moving, silent, unstoppable, as he made his way to the rendezvous point. He had completed the job. The crime lord, the syndicate's elite, all dead. But something felt off, like a cold chill gnawing at his instincts. He had done this countless times before, but tonight was different. His comm unit buzzed, the low hum sending a sharp ripple through the silence. He activated it without hesitation. Executioner, a voice crackled, familiar, yet strained. You need to listen carefully. The executioner's pulse didn't falter, but something inside him shifted. It was Samira, the only one he'd ever trusted in his crusade. She was more than a tech expert, she was his eyes when the darkness threatened to blind him. What's happening, Samira? He asked, his voice cold, though his mind raced. I've been monitoring the station's systems. There's a problem, she replied, her voice tight with urgency. The syndicate had a back door, a hidden escape route. They've initiated it, and someone inside has triggered the self-destruct protocol. A pulse of adrenaline surged through him, but he kept his voice steady. Who triggered it? There was a pause on the other end. You're not going to like this. A sickening realization hit him like a gut punch. He didn't need Samira to finish the sentence. He already knew. Samira, tell me you didn't. It wasn't me, executioner, she cut in sharply. But someone in your team sold you out. The world seemed to tilt. The betrayal stung like a physical wound. Someone, one of his own, had orchestrated this. They had set him up, using his warpath as a cover for their escape. They had played him. He didn't have time to think about it. His mission had just shifted. The station was going to explode, and whoever had betrayed him was going to burn with it. I'm not leaving without them, he growled. Don't do this, Samira warned, her voice cracking. If you go back now, you'll die with them. You'll never get out in time. The executioner didn't respond. He didn't need to. He already knew what he had to do. He had been set up. But he wouldn't allow them to walk away unscathed. Not after what they'd done. His steps were faster now, more deliberate. He would deal with the traitors, and he would make them pay. The corridors twisted and turned like the veins of a dying creature, the flashing red lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. He could almost taste the desperation, the fear, leaking from the abandoned sections of the station. But it didn't matter. He had a mission. And no one, could stop him now. Ahead, a figure appeared from the shadows, barely visible through the smoke. It was one of his trusted operatives, the one who had been with him since the beginning. The one who had earned his trust. But as the figure stepped into the light, a cold realization settled over him. Why? The executioner asked, his voice low, dangerous. The traitor, no longer a part of the team, no longer a part of the plan, grinned, the expression one of bitter amusement. You're the one who walked into this. You made yourself an enemy of the galaxy. All for what? For justice? Look at you now. Alone. You made a mistake, the executioner said, voice calm as ever. He didn't wait for a response. The traitor's hand moved toward his weapon, but the executioner was faster. In a fluid motion, he raised his rifle, and with a single, precise shot, the traitor fell to the floor, a lifeless heap. The station continued to hum with its impending doom, the countdown ticking away in the background. The executioner stood over the body, his expression impassive. He had no time for questions. No time for regrets. His mission had only one objective now, survival. The remaining traitors would die with the station. And the executioner? He would live to finish what he had started. As the final seconds ticked down, he turned away, already planning his next move. There would be no more betrayal. No more alliances. He was his own weapon now, focused, relentless, and without mercy. With the explosion only moments away, he walked into the darkness. And for the first time in his life, he was truly alone. The station's hull groaned under the weight of its imminent destruction. With every passing second, the countdown to its obliteration shrieked louder, its echo reverberating through the corridors. The executioner didn't flinch. He was dumb with hesitation. This was his final act, and nothing would stop him from seeing it through. He moved quickly, boots clanging against the metal floor, weaving through the narrow passageways toward the control room. His heart rate was steady, his focus sharp, nothing mattered except finishing the job. The traitors had been dealt with, but the mastermind still remained. And Zorath, the last criminal kingpin, was not going to escape. Zorath's voice crackled over the comm system, a twisted laugh sending chills down the executioner's spine. You think you can end it all? I've already won, human. You're too late. The self-destruct has been initiated. You'll never make it out alive. The executioner's hand tightened around his weapon. You're wrong, Zorath, he muttered under his breath. This ends now. He rounded a corner and found the last line of defense, Zorath's elite guards, armed and ready. The executioner barely broke stride. Without hesitation, he fired, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the hallway. One by one, the guards dropped, quick, clean, and efficient. There was no time to savor it. As the last of the bodyguards crumpled to the ground, the doors to the control room hissed open, and Zorath's shadowed form stood at the center, a smug grin plastered across his face. He was unarmed, his hands raised in mock surrender. You're persistent, I'll give you that, Zorath sneered. But it's over. The station will be your tomb, just as it will be mine. The executioner's eyes narrowed. You don't get to die on your terms. Zorath's grin faded. I had hoped you would come to understand, executioner. You're nothing more than a tool. You've slaughtered all those who stood in your way, for what, a broken galaxy. There will always be someone to replace the ones you kill. The executioner stepped forward, his voice low and cold. You're wrong. You're all wrong. It's not about replacing the corrupt, it's about erasing them. And that's what I'm doing now. With a swift movement, the executioner raised his rifle, pointing it squarely at Zorath. But the crime lord didn't flinch. Instead, he activated a concealed terminal beside him. The executioner's instincts kicked in, but it was too late. The countdown timer on the wall flashed red, the final seconds rapidly ticking away. Now it's truly over, Zorath taunted. The executioner didn't respond. He knew there was no escape. The station was going to collapse around them, and Zorath would die with it. But the executioner wasn't done yet. Not until he had ensured the galaxy would be free of one more pestilence. With a single shot, the executioner silenced the terminal's beeping, the echo of the rifle's report ringing through the control room. The blast hit its target, Zorath's hand, the one that had triggered the self-destruct. The crime lord recoiled, his grip slipping, his face contorting with pain. But there was no sympathy in the executioner's eyes, there was only justice. You should have fled, the executioner muttered. You should have run while you had the chance. Zorath stumbled back, blood dripping from his hand. You're too late. You'll die with me. The explosion is set, you can't stop it, The executioner stepped forward, his rifle still trained on the crime lord. I don't need to stop it. Zorath's eyes widened with disbelief. What do you? Before he could finish, the executioner fired again, this time taking out the system's core, the final trigger for the station's death. A moment later, the station's lights flickered, and the hum of its failing systems began to vibrate through the walls. With the last of the criminal empire crumbling, the executioner turned and walked toward the exit. The station was sinking, the explosion imminent. But as he passed through the corridors, his calm demeanor didn't falter. He didn't look back. As the station began its final collapse, the executioner vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only ruin. He had completed his mission. The galaxy would be rid of one more parasite, and his war would continue until every last stain of corruption was wiped away. The station's final breath was a low, guttural rumble, the foundations shaking as if the very core of the station itself had realized it was doomed. The executioner moved through the smoke-filled hallways, his steps steady, each footfall measured. His mission was complete. The last of the crime lords were gone, and the galaxy had one less cancer to deal with. But even in the silence that followed, there was no sense of victory. For the executioner, this wasn't about personal triumph. It was a necessity. A job. And there was always more work to be done. As the station began to collapse, tearing apart from the inside out, the remaining few survivors, too late to escape, found themselves trapped in the wreckage. The galaxy's most dangerous criminals, now reduced to cowering in fear, had underestimated the one force they could never defeat, the human executioner. And he would not stop. The sound of distant explosions rattled the remaining walls as the executioner made his way to the control room's last functioning escape pod. The self-destruct had been triggered, but there was still the matter of ensuring the operation was fully finished. His mind raced, but not in panic. His every move was instinctive, precise. Nothing had ever been left to chance. As he stepped into the pod and sealed the hatch, his eyes scanned the countdown clock that ticked away relentlessly. The countdown to oblivion was now a matter of seconds. He knew it would be close. But that wasn't what concerned him. It never had. The pod launched, jettisoning him from the crumbling station, the fiery remains of the colossal structure now a fading streak of destruction in the rearview. But even in the silence of space, with his mind momentarily free of the chaos, he knew there would be no rest. Zoratha's death had sent a ripple through the galaxy, but it was only a drop in the ocean. The criminal empires he had obliterated were only the beginning. Others would rise to take their place, each one just as corrupt, just as vile, and just as dangerous. His eyes narrowed. Another hunt was coming. The galaxy was rife with shadows that needed to be erased. The executioner would keep pushing forward until every last corrupt soul was silenced. He had no other purpose. His comm unit buzzed again, and the voice of Samira crackled through the static, a welcome interruption from the emptiness of space. Executioner, you did it. I'm tracking your escape pod. You're clear for now. The station's gone, and the syndicate's fractured. But there's still work to be done. The executioner didn't speak, his gaze fixed on the stars outside the pod's small viewport. He was done with words. Actions were all that mattered. Don't get complacent, Samira continued, her tone still sharp. You've taken down one empire, but the underworld is vast. You've made an enemy of more than just Zorath. The executioner let out a single breath, his fingers lightly brushing the side of the console. I'll keep going. Samira didn't respond right away. She knew better than to argue. There was no slowing the executioner once he had a target in mind. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a weapon, and one the galaxy would learn to fear, even if they never truly understood him. The stars outside the pod stretched into the void, the distance between him and the galaxy's criminal world growing larger with each passing second. But he wasn't fooled. The underworld had a way of resurfacing, and he had already been drawn into its depths once more. His journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. With a flick of his hand, the executioner closed the comms channel. Samira would be waiting for his next orders, but she didn't need to know what was coming next. He never gave anyone the luxury of warning. The pod's engines hummed softly as it moved deeper into the endless black, a solitary speck in a galaxy filled with corruption, violence, and decay. The executioner's mission was clear. He would hunt down every last trace of darkness and silence it until the galaxy could breathe freely again. And so, as the stars stretched out before him, the executioner set course for the next shadow. The end of one empire was only the beginning of his war. And he would never stop fighting. The galaxy wasn't finished with him yet. And he was done with mercy.